Hey, Scott Russell, we're in a place right now where there's so much abuse, so much just trash, and I think we throw a lot of names at some of the authorities. Trudeau, oh, he's a psychopath. Ardern, she's a psychopath. It's just Ruta, he's a psychopath, and we go on and on and on. But have you ever been in a relationship with somebody who's psychopathic or sociopathic tendencies? Have you? Because what's the first thing they tell you when you're in that relationship? Don't engage. Don't engage them. They feed on it. They feed on the drama. They feed on the anger. They feed on what they can get you to respond to doing. And when you give them nothing, they die. They can't handle it. And I want to submit today that we are living like victims. The people in the freedom movement are living like victims. You can say, well, what should we do? Well, I tell you what we shouldn't do is what we've been doing with some of this stuff. Living like victims. Oh, poor me. It's their fault I'm like this. I had a good life and the government's done this to me. It's BS. Get over it. It's like the way of life we knew, the way of life we've had is gone. And if you're going to fight for it, you're giving your energy to something that's taking away from you being able to actually do something constructive with your life. You are feeding a psychopath. You are feeding a psychopathic system by giving it your strength. And you can run around doing all sorts of things, and when you come back you feel great because the little community around us that we've formed is all like, oh, that was so good, you really socked it to them there. And you know what? I'm looking at that and I'm going, no, what a disgrace we are to ourselves, first and foremost. Why not rise above it? Why not be someone who sits above everything that's going on and says, you know what, instead of being part of the problem, I'm going to be part of the solution. And I can tell you that's life. Every relationship we've been in, how many relationships have you had? How many marriages? How many boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever it is you've had? And when the whole thing falls apart, it's always their fault, right? It takes a special sort of person to be able to stop and go, you know what, I put myself there. It takes a special sort of person to be able to see where they sit in the whole equation, because it's so easy to blame others. My marriage fell apart. I currently don't have anybody in my life. Now I can look at my ex of 28 years and blame her for all sorts of things, but where does it get me? Where does it get my children? Where does it get anyone? It gets me trapped in the power of something that's just not right. And ultimately you have to get to a point in yourself where you go, you know what, I take responsibility for what happened. Why do I take responsibility? Because I put myself in that relationship. I put myself there. I enabled myself to be abused, to be misused, instead of putting my foot down and being the man that I needed to be. And sometimes it takes a good slap up the side of the head for us to see that we're the problem. Yeah, everybody's got problems. There's no perfect person out there. But if we want to live projecting ourselves onto somebody else's problem, we're the problem. And I think it's the same with this freedom movement. We've looked at our authorities, we've looked at the police, we've looked at all these different ones, and we project our pain onto them. We project on, oh, it's their fault, it's their fault. Well, absolutely, it's not. Yeah, they're doing wrong, and you are a victim, and I am a victim. But if we live like a victim, we are dead while we live. We're dead in our heart, and we'll never love again. We'll never live again. If I live in a victim of mentality of my broken marriage, I'm a victim. I'll never love again, and I'll never deserve to be loved again, because I'm looking for somebody's sympathy, or I'm looking for someone's whatever, and I don't want to exist on that level. When somebody comes to my life, they're coming to my life because it's right, not because I'm poor me. So it's a hard word, but I want to just say it today. Some of you have lived this. You know, when terrible stuff has happened to you in your life, but you had to get to a point, you rose up and you said, yeah, what they did was disgusting. But somewhere I have to take responsibility for myself. I have to take responsibility for the fact that I put myself there, that I had the warning signs and I didn't listen, that I kept enabling that. I kept allowing them to abuse me. Maybe you're, empathetic, and you've allowed that empath. You've allowed someone to come and suck the empathy out of you, and because you've needed to be needed. And let's get right down to it. You need to know your value. You need to know that you're loved. You need to know that your Creator loves you. And I think it's the same with our freedom movement. We have to be very careful that we don't feed the very thing that we're trying to stop by some of our actions. Now, I'm not singling out any particular action. I'm singling out our hearts today. I'm saying, where's your heart? Yes, I'm a victim of what they've done and what they're continuing to do. But I sure ain't going to live like one. I'm going to live off-grid while I'm in the grid. And I tell you, I still think, what are you going to do? You're going to live off-grid. Let's say that. Oh, gee, I'm going to live off-grid. Okay. If you're going to live off-grid, you're going to have no cell phones. You're going to have no contact with the outside world. You're not going to have a mortgage because it's all going digital. You're not going to be able to operate with any money. So basically, you've watched some movie on TV where someone's gone out into Alaska and they're living in a log cabin in the middle of nowhere and they've got nothing, no contact. Or they did film themselves and send that out. So come on, let's be realistic here. If you're going to live off-grid, you need to live off-grid. Because somewhere along the line, you have a connection to the grid. You have a connection to people that you love and you care about. And it means that you've got to come back into the town, because what are you going to do when one of your children gets sick? How are you going to get back? You can't have a car because you're off grid, right? If you're going to register a car, you're going to have some sort of way of doing that. So let's be realistic. Do you have the skill set to be hardcore off grid? Because they're the only ones that are going to make it. And they're going to come for you. They're going to come. So we have to live off-grid while in the grid. You have to start to be creative in how we live. I put some videos up on that. Now, all of you are not going to live the same way. But I tell you what we can do is start to take some principles out of there, and you can start to look and you can start to become creative in your life as to how you're going to live. Because ultimately, if you don't get creative, we're dead in the water. And I can tell you now, it's going to hit you. And it's going to hit us. It's going to hit me hard. The digital ID, where we're not going to be able to maybe have the way of life we've had. Are you prepared to say, all right, I'm going to live off grid while in the grid? Because it's coming. And I can guarantee you, most of the people that are playing talking tough now, when things get tough, they're going to roll over because they're victims. They're living as victims now, and if you're living as a victim now, you're going to live as a victim when it hits. And when it hits in a big way, you're going to feel so sorry for yourself. You might sit in some little group around somebody and, licking each other's wounds and poor me, and you'll have some fantastic stories that you'll get some great sympathy of the things that have happened to you that have happened to nobody else. You were arrested 20 times, and man, that guy was only arrested 10 times. And come on. I don't want to sound like I'm being sarcastic or facetious here, but it's time we all grew up. It's time we looked and said, no, things are changing. I need to take responsibility for my life. I need to take responsibility for my actions, and I need to start putting things in place that are going to make a difference to the direction I'm going in. Because I'm not going to live in a bush under a rock in a cave somewhere. I'm going to live where there's people. I care about people. So I have to be off the grid while I'm in the grid. So I think the biggest thing we can do with that is say, let's stop being a victim. Stop being a victim. Stop living controlling others. Stop thinking you can control, because your control is just your insecurity and your fear. For me, as I've let go, I abandon so I can abide. I abandon my control so I can abide in love and peace. Because remember, where there's pain, there's control. Where there's control, there's isolation. Where there's isolation, there's pain. Where there's pain, control. Control, isolation. And it's just a vicious cycle we go in. If you feel alone, if you feel like you're not loved, you're a victim. Let it go. Give it to your Creator. And you know what? We have to be vulnerable again. We have to be vulnerable. For my life, I have to be vulnerable. I put myself out there with the places and the people I feel to. Sometimes nothing comes back. But that doesn't change who I am. That's not my fault. They're not asking me to reach out to them. If I reach out to some lady and she wants nothing to do with me, that's not her fault. That's my fault. It was not my fault. It's my problem. I put myself out there. We just have to take responsibility for ourselves. And I think we need to do it in our personal life. We need to do it in our spiritual life. And then we need to do it with our natural life, the freedom family that's all around us. So a bit of a hard word, and maybe I made a few enemies with that, but you know what, it is what it is.